Right guys, so today we're going to do a JZZ30 into an Altezza 2001 to 2005 using an AltezzaLink ECU. So let's get into it. Right guys, so this is a JZZ30 1JZ-GTE going into a Toyota Altezza. We're using an AltezzaLink ECU and we've adapted the harness to work with that. So as you can see, this is an adapted harness. So we've taken the original harness, completely stripped it of everything it doesn't need, cleaned it and added everything that we wanted to add in. So let's take a look at what went into that process. Right, as you can see, yeah, we just took the whole harness, we stripped it down completely, removed everything that wasn't required anymore, added in everything that we're going to go through in a minute that you can see, and then put it all back together. So what we're going to do today is, well, we're going to do the layout. So I'm going to go through the entire harness from the ECU box all the way along, showing the customer where everything goes. And then what we'll do is we'll go into some testing. Now, unfortunately, in this particular case, because we've adapted the original harness, we can't fit this plastic thing under our intake on our 1JZ-GTE. So that means, unfortunately, that we can't start this engine with this harness, I'm afraid. But because it's an aftermarket ECU, we have actually gone and tested every single thing, like the coils, injectors, etc., just to make sure that everything is working 100%. Okay. Right, so for the layout section, let's jump into the ECU box here, and then we'll carry on from there. So it looks a bit of a mess, but just bear in mind, my car is an IS200, not an Altezza, so we do have to make an adaptation. Now, in this particular case, in terms of the customer, when you look at the completed photos at the end, you'll see that basically what's going to happen is the customer's already going to have these two plugs in his Altezza. He's just going to plug them straight into the ECU, because the ECU is an AltezzaLink, all those plugs are going to be correct. What we've done is we've taken the two engine harness plugs and we've repinned them for the JZZ30 1JZ-GTE. Okay, so that's what you can see here. We've taken care of all of that side of things. Now, obviously, we have to interface with the body plug. So we have our body plug, our gray one here, our black one over there. So remember, this is a 2001 to 2005 Altezza. So that means it has the gray and the black and the blue connector that you see down there. Okay, so those are the three body plugs. So again, this is really nice and simple. Those two plugs are unique. You can't get them in the wrong place. They just plug straight in. These three body plugs, again, are unique, so you can't get them in the wrong place, and they will all plug straight in directly, okay? Then the last thing inside the ECU box that we've added in is a CAN plug, okay? So this can be tucked away neatly down inside there. This is for if you want to add any CAN devices. So there's a 12 volts, a ground, CAN high, and CAN low, and it is wired according to the standard link CAN plug. So you can plug into any link device. If you want to put a Haltech device in, obviously on the Haltech side, you need to change the pin out to match the link, because CAN high and CAN low are swapped around between link and Haltech. Any other CAN devices you want to add, make sure it is compatible with the link, and then also make sure that the wiring is the way it is, and we can always help with that if required. Okay. Now, as you can see here, I've taken a 2JZ-GE VVTi ECU box from a GS300, because they are the rectangular shape that's designed for this particular setup. So that is basically all that the customer is going to require, is to get his hands on one of those if he doesn't want to take out his Altezza 3S GE ECU box and use that. So these are really cheaply available on eBay now. So if you need the case like that, no problem at all. This one's quite nice to use because it does actually give you a opening, and you can see I've got the tuning cable in here. So obviously this can be left dangling inside the ECU box, and it shouldn't give you any dramas. Also, in this particular case, which you'll see in a minute, we have actually added wiring for a separate map sensor. But if you would like, you can actually use the built-in map sensor, and you can see the nozzle down there. So if required, you can do that. Okay. Right, so that's the ECU box over there. It's really nice and simple. Everything just plugs in, nothing too complicated there. And there's your tuning cable for when you want to connect up to your laptop, like I have there. Right. Let's move along. So we have our grommet that we put in there, and that's going to slot directly into there into your Altezza ECU box. No dramas, straightforward. The harness is going to run up along here, which hopefully is plenty enough room to reach at the back. Obviously, because this engine's on an engine stand, it's obviously way high up, etc. So it's kind of looking a bit wonky. And obviously this is too far forward, etc., etc. So yeah, but that'll bolt directly onto your engine as it did before, and that should have plenty enough room to run around there and go around there into the ECU box for you. All right, now, before we get to the rubber part here and into the plastic section over here, we've got a breakout section over here. So I'm going to go through exactly what is in that section over there. So first of all, we have our map sensor. Okay. Now this is a standard Toyota plug. So again, you can use the standard Toyota map sensor, which is over here. That would have bolted originally to the JZZ30, so you can use one of those, no problem at all. Luckily, all Toyota map sensors have the same pinout, so you can use any one you want. It doesn't matter where it came from. But obviously, you can't use one like this from an IS200 because this is only designed for 1 bar. So if you have a turbo, it's not going to work because it's going to stop reading at 1 bar and go no further than that. Okay. Also coming out here is going to be our injector harness. Hopefully you can see that, INJ labeled over there. That then goes onto an 8-pin plug. That then goes on and plugs into all of the standard injectors. So again, you can see the plugs over there. And we've color coded them, but they are all labeled for you as well. So you can see that says injector. Well, hopefully I can focus in on there. Anyway, that says injector 3 there. Okay, but they are all labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for you guys. So you don't have to worry too much about that. You just got to plug it in and obviously go ahead and plug one of the injectors. All right. Also coming out of here is ignition. So in this case, we are running some VW short coils. Now, these are the shorter coils, shorter than the red ones, which you are used to seeing on most builds these days. So they fit much nice and neater down when you're doing a 1JZ or 2JZ-GTE and you want to change coils. So these are definitely an option, open and available to you guys. Luckily, they do use the same connector as the red coils, but they have a different pinout. So you must be aware of that, okay? So at the end of the day, you cannot just plug these coils into your existing harness if it was designed for red coils. The pinouts have to be changed on these, okay? Right. But other than that, they work absolutely fine. And in this case, because we're using the AltezzaLink, unfortunately, we don't have access to IGT5 and 6 because they're being used to control fuel pump and the cooling fan along with the switch in the bottom of the radiator. So we are running these in a wasted spark setup. So we are firing 2 cores at the same time, exactly like you would if you had the JZ VVTi setup, where you'd be using these 3 individual coils. So again, exactly the same as that. So nothing major there at all. But we are actually firing individual coils on here. Okay, so that's the ignition side. It's really nice and simple. Just a 12-pin DTM connector goes straight in there. Okay, what you also notice out here is we have fuel. This is labeled fuel. Oh, this is not, there you go, that's better, fuel. Okay, so at this stage, the customer's not opted to put a fuel pressure sensor in, but that can be added if he so desires. Okay, so the plug is there ready for it, and you just got to create the other end to adapt to whatever fuel pressure sensor you like to use. Reason we put it at the back is because 9 out of 10 times the fuel is coming in from this side on the passenger side or left-hand side. So therefore, it's much more convenient to have it there. So you've got a short little harness that can plug into your fuel pressure regulator if you're going to use one of those, and then obviously put the fuel pressure sensor in there. But because it is, the harness can be made as long or as short as you want, you can put the fuel pressure sensor pretty much wherever you want it, and that harness can just be made to reach that particular place. Okay, right, so that's that. Again, little rubber section over here. Then we're going into our black piece of plastic, and again, you've got a couple of mounting points there and there and there. Okay, really, really simple and straightforward. Now, the first section that pops out is going to be over here, and it's going to go to the cam sensor, which you can see plugged in there. Now, you'll notice on your engine that you have a cam sensor here and a cam sensor here. We're only using this cam sensor, not that one over there, so that plug has been completely removed. Again, but you can't remove that sensor Obviously, it doesn't need to stay in place. It's just a case of you're not going to actually plug anything into it, okay? The other thing that's coming out there is going to be your idle control valve. So that's your idle control valve plug over there. And again, obviously, we've changed the AltezzaLink, which used to run drive-by-wire. We've changed it over to run an idle air control valve. So that works absolutely fine as well. Okay. Right, so moving on the plastic over here, we then have the next breakout. And again, this is pretty much all standard. So when you bolt it in, everything's going to go in exactly the same place. But coming out of here, we have our gearbox plug. Let me just see if I can get that in there. So there you go. It does say gearbox on. You might just have to take my word for that. There you go, gearbox. Fantastic, brilliant. Okay, so that's going off to an R154 gearbox. So you can see we've got our standard R154 reverse and our standard R154 speed sensor at the back that we're going to test a little bit later on in the video. We then have two earthing points there. Now again, this is a 2JZ-GTE VVTi, so your earthing points are not specifically there, but they will be near here, and you have two earthing points there. We then also have the evap solenoid. So I have actually put that in for you guys, so that'll be straightforward. And then coming down here, we then have two breakout points, one going to the starter motor solenoid and the other one going to the knock sensor. Okay, so at this stage, we are retaining the normal single wire narrowband knock sensors. And what you'll notice as well, if you know a bit about the AltezzaLink, is the original 3SGE only had one knock input, but that is perfectly fine. We've taken both of these knock sensors. They are going to the ECU. The engine both has a 12-tooth crank trigger and a cam sensor. So this is capable of running fully sequential, which is the injectors are fully sequential as well. So the ECU, if it detects knock, will know exactly which cylinder is meant to be firing, and then it'll know that that cylinder is knocking. Okay, so absolutely fine. And to top it off, they're narrowband sensors anywhere, so they're only going to peak up with a noise when they actually detect knock. Okay, so if the customer or whoever buys this in the future tries to put this on a enhanced engine or built engine, so you've changed cams, you've changed cams, changed pistons, rods, or anything like that at all, it's probably going to be advisable to switch over to a wideband knock sensor setup, in which case that would require wiring in because it's not wired in at the moment. Okay, right, so that's that section over there, nice and easy. A little bit further, we come out over here, and that's the next breakout section. And first of all, you've got your IAT sensor. Okay, so that goes straight there. You've then got two more earthing points, one that we've added in and one original one. So again, there'll be an earthing point down here where you can bolt it in. Okay, there's another earthing point over there as well. So you've got three in total coming out in this section. I think it was two originally, and we've added one in, so that's why you've got three. Okay. Next up, we've got oil. So again, I'm going to hold that there. So there's our oil. You see we've got a 4-pin plug in this case. Now, the harness is going to come with just the oil pressure sensor. Now then, because this is an Altezza 3SGE, you actually had an oil pressure sensor in your cluster. Well, it was oil pressure gauge in your cluster. So this cannot be plugged into the standard oil pressure switch that comes on a JZ, okay? So in order for this to work, you will need to put an Altezza 3SGE oil pressure sensor into the same location as the oil pressure switch. Now, it is a straight swap. The threads are the same. Everything is the same, okay? What I'll do is I'll put the part number down in the description below. It's only actually shared between two vehicles, the Altezza and the Land Cruiser. Okay, so there's only two vehicles that use that particular oil pressure sensor. It's one of the really old-fashioned ones, big thing with just one little plug on it on the end, and that's where this one goes into. Now, obviously, this plug is exactly the same as the oil pressure switch, but if you do connect this, all that's going to basically happen is your oil pressure gauge is probably just going to shoot to max, because basically you're just shorting it to ground. So more than likely, that's exactly what's going to happen. So if you don't have that sensor, unfortunately, there's no point plugging this in because it ain't going to do anything. It's not going to give you oil light or anything like that at all. It's basically just going to go from there. The only way you could possibly use it was if you turn on the ignition and the oil pressure went straight to up, and then technically if you lost oil pressure, or when you switched it on, it went straight to back to zero again because it lost the ground. You could kind of use that as an oil light if you wanted to, because effectively it would just mean if your oil pressure gauge shot to up, actually you've lost oil pressure. But anyway, again, I strongly advise using the Altezza 3SGE oil pressure sensor that comes on that 3SGE engine and the Land Cruiser. Again, I will put part numbers down below for you. Okay. Next up, we have a drive-by-wire plug. You're probably wondering what that is. Now, in this case, this is not going to be connected to anything in the configuration that the engine is currently going to be running in when the swap is first done. We have added this because the AltezzaLink is perfectly capable of doing drive-by-wire. So everything that you need to use drive-by-wire is in here, which means we do have 2 analog inputs, okay? We also have a 5 volts and we have a signal ground. So if you're very clever, you would have realized that you could also use this for any 0 to 5 volt analog sensor, and you could put 2 in here if you weren't going to use the drive-by-wire, okay? So technically speaking, if you wanted to, you could possibly do an oil temperature sensor from this one and a fuel temperature sensor from this one if you so desired. But it's not ideal because it would require pull-ups, etc., resistors be put in, but perfectly can be done if required, okay? Next up, coming down here, is going to be the standard TPS sensor. Okay, so this is the one that's going to go into the vehicle in its current setup, because it is just a normal cable throttle. It's not a drive-by-wire, okay? So this one is going to plug in and it's going to work as factory in terms of the JZZ30 1JZ-GTE, okay? And then lastly, coming out here, we have our other knock sensor for the front, and we have our aircon plug, okay? So because we're using the AltezzaLink, it's got its built-in MPX translator. We are perfectly capable of running the aircon because it will receive the signal from inside the vehicle. It does have the pressure sensor, etc. So that is all working as you would expect it to, okay? Right, so that's that section over there. So moving along, it's just going to come to the front here. It's going to pop over the top there, and we just have 3 little sections down here, okay? So we've got our coolant temperature sensor. Now, again, because we're using AltezzaLink, it's actually transmitting coolant temperature to the dash via MPX. So you'll see that we've removed what would have been the normal single wire sensor that's in there. So again, just leave that sensor screwed in, just don't plug anything into it. Coming down here, we then have our crank sensor, and we have our alternator plug, which is the older, big, round alternator plug there. So I've just temporarily made a solution to do it in there so we can see the alternator light and everything coming up on the dash. Okay, right, so that's basically it. That's the whole layout. Really, really simple. What we've done for the customer in this particular case is we've added a bunch of functionality to be able to add sensors in at a later date. We were limited on what we could do in total, so like we didn't have the opportunity to put all the wiring in for the wideband knock sensors, but again, that can definitely be added. This is just simply taped up, and that grommet can then just be untaped, and you can add the wires in yourself. So again, no major dramas there at all if that wanted to be added further down the line. Okay. Right, so that is the entire layout of the harness. Again, it should be super simple. The only extra things you need to add in is going to be your earth to your block, okay, and your main starter power cable. So that's the one that runs down there and goes straight to the battery. And then you have your alternator, which then will come and plug in directly over here. And that's the correct place to put it because that's where it is fused for the alternator. So again, alternator goes to here, starter motor goes to there. All right, so alternator cable, starter motor cable, the big thick one, and grounds. That's all you need to add in. The rest of the harness is just going to go in, bolting where it was before, and it's going to plug directly into the plugs of the Altezza. Okay, right, so as I said, next thing we're going to do is we're going to do the testing of it. And as I said, I can't start this one, unfortunately, because I can't get the intake on with this particular harness as it is currently, and therefore I won't be able to obviously start the engine up. But I have already done the testing for things like coils and injectors. I've gone into the software and I've tested to make sure that the outputs are correct. So again, I'm not going to show you that now. We're going to do a couple of little tests, but if you want to see stuff like that, you can go to our link playlist, and I have a video where I show you how to test the outputs, and therefore you could do this on your harness. And to be fair to you guys, it's not bad practice to do it when it gets to you, because that way at least you know that everything is still working by the time it's ended up with you and obviously put inside your vehicle. Wires can get pinched when installing, etc., etc. So again, there's no harm in checking all your outputs when you get it there. But as with everything that we supply, all of the outputs and everything on the base map are already set up correctly by the time you get your ECU and harness. Okay, so bear with me a second. I'm going to pop back and we'll get into that testing. Right, guys, so we are back now and we're going to do the testing. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run through all the tests that we are actually going to carry out. You need to ignore the engine running part. I'm going to make alterations for that particular setup over there. But first thing we're going to be testing, because it's an AltezzaLink plug and play, is that our ambient temperature works. That's the outside temperature, and that's on the climate control you see over there. Then we're going to go over to the cluster which is over there. We're going to make sure that our check engine light and our alternator light are coming on. Okay, check engine light is actually hardwired to the cluster, but alternator light is done via MPX. We want to make sure that that does work. Okay. Then we're going to come back over here to our gearbox harness and we're going to test our reverse and our speed. Okay, so again, that's a standard usual test if you watched a bunch of our videos, nothing too complicated there. Fuel pump, basically all I'm going to do is we're going to pop over to the ECU, I'm going to go to the fuel pump output and I'm going to test it, okay? Then we're going to have AC request. Now, as I said, the AltezzaLink is translating the MPX to the ECU, and then the ECU is using CAN to talk to that MPX translator, and then it's obviously sending the commands over. So what you'll see is if I just go over to here under configuration, you'll see down here that we have CAN digital input. One is called AC request, and that's part of the standard Altezza base map that we started with on this particular setup. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the AC clutch output, or ACMG as they call it in Toyota world, and I'm going to activate it, and you're going to hear the relay, which is just under there, click in, and that's all I want to see is to make sure that is happening, okay? And same with the fuel pump, we're just going to hear the relay click, so that's kind of a similar test. Now, in terms of engine running, I am actually going to crank the engine over on the key, so you can see that literally it just plugs straight in and the engine turns over no problem. Injectors and coils I have already tested, so I'm not going to be doing that again because it would take absolutely ages. You've got to go through each individual one and go on. Anyway, it's super boring. Again, if you go to my video where I show you where I test the outputs, you'll see exactly how we do that. I've just done it previously before I did the video. Now, tacho, what I'm going to have to do basically is I'm going to have to turn the ignition off and turn it back on again. And what you'll see is I've done a tacho sweep in the settings. What that means is the tacho is going to go all the way to 7,000 and then come back again, okay? If it does that, I know that the tacho output is correct because obviously I'm using the tacho output on the ECU and that should be working 100%. And then for the coolant temp, I'm going to be a little bit cheeky and I'm basically going to use my heat gun down there. I'm going to heat up the sensor and we're going to watch the gauge go up as I do that. So I'm going to try my best to do that. It kind of needs two hands, but we'll see what we can do. Right, so that's all the testing that we're going to be doing. So let's go and jump in. So as I said, it is plug and play. So again, you're going to take your key in your Altezza and you're going to simply turn it on. And you can see there's the sweep for you. So I won't do that again, but yeah, you can see the tacho is working 100%. But what I want to see now is the ambient temperature. And you can see it is 17 degrees, which is absolutely correct inside here. So again, super happy with that. Know that works 100%. Moving along, check engine light and charge light. Well, you've probably seen that already, but there we go. We've got check engine light and we've got charge light. Remember, on the Altezza cluster, you've got an actual oil pressure gauge, okay? So there is no oil pressure light, okay? So that's why I said, just remember, you do need to fit that sensor in order for your oil pressure gauge to work. As I've said, you can also add an oil pressure sensor of your own to the ECU, the Link ECU, and therefore you'll be able to actually monitor pressures correctly and accurately, and you can build safeties around that as well. So it's perfectly open to you, really easy to do. It's just a case of unplugging the original harness. We'll send you a new sub harness, you plug it in. We even supply sensors as well. And therefore then you can I'll show you how to go into the ECU and activate that input, because obviously I can't activate that input now. Otherwise you're going to get an error on your ECU saying that that particular analog voltage input is erroring because it's going straight to 5 volts because nothing actually connected to it, okay? Right, so that's that. So we've done charge light and alternator light. So next up we're going to do reverse and speed. So what I'm going to have to do now is we're just going to turn this cluster around. Fingers crossed, hopefully it can stay. It's always fun trying to get it to balance. Right, good enough for me. Right, so for the reverse, it is super simple. All I'm basically going to do is bridge the reverse switch, which is actually what your gearbox will do in the car. And therefore I should hear the reverse beep. Now that's important because obviously there's no signal to the ECU to tell it's in reverse. This is purely just for the vehicle. So as I bridge that, you can hear our beep there. So that is perfect. So that means that that's actually a physical wire from the reverse switch to the cluster and therefore the entire vehicle. So I know that if that is bridged in a complete car, this is obviously half a car, the reverse lights would be coming on along with that beep. Okay. So next up is going to be speed. So if you watch any of my other videos, this is going to be very familiar to you, but basically all I'm going to do now is I'm using my, this is actually an analog sort of tacho and speedo converter, but it has a test function that it can output a signal to help you find your tacho and speed wires if you're using these in a swap, okay? But what it does for me is it needs power and ground, which we have in here. So again, 12 volts and ground because it's a Hall effect sensor. And then I have yellow, which is an output signal there. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to put you guys down for a second on the camera. Let me just quickly just balance that slightly there. Right, I'm going to get set up quickly here, and I'm supplying power and ground from the switch. Now, the reason I do that is it actually tells me literally from the plug that everything is correct. All 3 wires are correct all the way to the end of the terminal, okay? So that's the important part. That's why I actually push them into the terminals and not just test it, just give the signal and be absolutely fine with that. So I want to make sure that all 3 wires are working 100%, okay? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can move this out the way. Sorry, it's a bit of a balancing act there. But now you can see the cluster, and you can see me feeding a signal to it. And as I do that, you can see the cluster is shooting all the way around. So that tells me that all the wiring from here, including the crimps, everything is 110%, and you should have no issues on your side at all. Right, quick little tip. If you get it to your side and your speedo's not working, now remember there are 2 reasons or a couple of reasons that it could not be working. But what I would suggest that you do that's a really nice, easy test is basically unbolt the speed sensor from the back of the gearbox, take a drill, tape the drill to the end of the speed sensor because it's got a little gear on it, put the ignition on because it needs power, which it gets with the ignition on, and get your friend to sit in the car while you spin the drill. If you then see speed come through, what that basically means is your speed sensor's fine, the wiring is fine, so there's a problem with how the speed sensor is engaging with the gearbox. If you do that and you get no speed at all, okay, then more than likely the fault's either going to be with the sensor or the wiring, but at least you don't have to worry about the actual gearbox itself. You know the gearbox is all good. Okay, little quick tip for you again. Right, next up we are going to do a fuel pump. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is we're going to be moving over to the actual laptop. And what I need to do now is just remember which one is fuel pump control, and that is going to be IGT5, which is the reason why we can't run this fully sequential on the ignition. So what I want to do now is I want to go to analog outputs, auxiliary outputs. Hopefully you can see all this in the top there. Now fuel pump is a sort of set standard, so you can just go straight into fuel pump. It'll tell you that it's got ignition 5, and that's where the output is. And all I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it on, and as I do, you're going to hear the relay inside you click. I'm going to turn it off. There you go. So that's fantastic. So I know that this ECU is perfectly capable of turning on the fuel pump because I can actually hear the relay working. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is, I know we're going to do AC requests in a second, but first I'm going to test the AC clutch or the output from the ECU to tell it to turn the AC on. Okay. So what we're going to do now is, again, we're going to go to auxiliary outputs. We are going to go in, AC is not in auxiliary outputs. My apologies. It's in chassis and body. We're going to go to AC clutch control. Mode is basic. Again, the help section here is super helpful, guys. That's why it's called the help section. So again, if you're not sure about something, just click on it and you'll see that that changes, and it's actually trying to give you information on that particular point, okay? But in this case, all I want to do now is I want to go and turn this on. Okay, so hopefully you heard that, but let me go back over here. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn it off. Fantastic. Okay, so I know that as long as all the signals and everything are right in the Altezza, so your pressure's correct, your pipes are all hooked up, everything's 100%, the air conditioning will work on this particular vehicle. Okay. Right, so in terms of AC requests, I'm going to have to sort of come here, go around, go back again, but what we're looking for is over here, CAN digital input, because remember, like I said, there's an MPX decoder inside there, and it's actually talking to the Link ECU via CAN, okay? But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to press the AC button on. And let's move back around to here. And you can see their AC request has now become active. Okay. Right, so I'm happy that the ECU is happy and it's getting all the MPX data from the vehicle that it does need, and that everything should work 110% once everything is done. Okay. Right, so that's that side, and that's all that I wanted to test with the ignition on. So let's go over to the engine running. Again, it's not going to be the engine running, it's just going to be a couple of tests that I'm going to carry out. So first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that the starter motor works on the key, all right, to make sure we've wired everything correctly. So here we go. Brilliant. Right, so the motor turns over at the start of the turn of the key. Super happy with that. That means all the neutral switch stuff has been bypassed correctly by us and the whole 9 yards, okay? Injectors and coils, already been through that. I've tested each one individually. If you want to see what that looks like, again, go to our link playlist, find testing your outputs, and I've done a video completely dedicated just to that to show you exactly how to do that. All right. Tacho, well, we've already seen that at the beginning. I turned the ignition on and you could see the sweep all the way to 7 and back again. So also I've made sure that the calibration is correct. But with the link, it's nice and easy because technically speaking, the engine's 6-cylinder. The car is 6-cylinder in this case, okay? So if you put the multiplier on 1, so I'm just going to show you one here. Let's go auxiliary outputs. Let's go into tacho. Sorry, hopefully you can see all this. But yeah, so we've got it there. TAC outputs auxiliary 3. I'm not testing it or whatever, but this is the multiplier that I'm talking about here where it says 1, okay? So, technically speaking, I've told the Link ECU that this is a 6-cylinder engine. So if the multiplier is at 1, it's going to put out a 6-cylinder signal, all right? Now then, when the customer gets it on their side, they're going to have to do a little bit of work with that multiplier, and what I mean by that is they're going to have to change it so it works with a 4-cylinder. Unfortunately, I don't have an Altezza clock, so I couldn't do that here now, but it's very, very simple. All you basically want to do is just change the multiplier and get to where you want to be. So if you want a nice, easy way of doing it, all you're basically going to do is leave it as it is now, so it's got a key on sweep. So as soon as you turn the key on, the rev gauge is going to go like that and come back again, okay? You can set the RPM to 7,000, and all you've basically got to do is sit inside the vehicle, turn the key on, watch the sweep. Does it go to like 5,000? Okay, cool. Then change the multiplier from 1 to 1.2, okay? And then literally just keep changing that figure and just see, is it going up? Is it going down? Is it getting closer? Is it getting further away? And you just set the multiplier until it does that. It's super accurate because you're using the sweep function. And the fact is you want to see that needle come straight to 7, stop, and then come back again, okay? You can actually change that if you wanted to. You could change it from 7 to 6 to 5 to 4. It really doesn't matter. But what I also do is I keep the sweep time to 2 seconds rather than 1 because it takes a bit longer to get there. It's easier for you to see exactly where it's coming to rest rather than being super quick going zoop, zoop, and then you can't really see what it is. You can make it 3 seconds or 4 seconds if you really wanted to make it even longer. Okay. Right, so coolant temp. I said I'm going to be a little bit cheeky here, and basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to heat up the temperature sensor that's plugged into the harness over here. So at the moment you can see the coolant temperature is flat on ice cold, okay? And all I'm basically going to do now is try and get this into a position where I can actually just balance this up. Let me see if I can do that. Right, balancing that up there. And all I'm going to do now, you probably can hear it in the background, I'm going to whack it with the heat gun. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the camera on there because I've got to keep an eye on this. But yeah, the coolant temperature doesn't tend to read until it's above 40 degrees. And obviously we should be about 17 at the moment. And the heat gun should do a good job of heating that up. But you can see already, there she goes. She is climbing. So that is absolutely fantastic. And you'll see she comes to a midpoint. And she's going to sit there, so I'm going to try and get this at a better angle, more of what you'd be seeing as a driver. There you go, you'll see she'll actually sit at a midpoint for a little while for a couple of degrees. Okay, but there you go, I'm just heating up that coolant temperature sensor there. Rightio. Okay, so with coolant temperature sensors in gauges, what you'll probably notice is that in actual fact, it'll sit in the middle for quite a few degrees. That's perfectly normal. It's to help people who you don't want your temperature gauge to keep going up and up. So what they'll do is when it gets to about running temperature, it'll sort of have like sort of 10 degrees either side of that. And within that sort of, it could be 10, it could be 20 degrees sort of span. It's not actually going to move. It's going to sit dead center. And that's to allow for fluctuation. So in other words, let's say your engine gets up to like 95 degrees and the fans comes on, then it kicks down to 85, then it heats up to 95, then it comes back down to 85, then it goes up. So what you don't want is your temperature gauge going up and down, up and down, up and down. So what they do is they build in that sort of buffer zone dead set in the middle. where basically if it changes by sort of 10 to 15 degrees, the needle's not going to move. It keeps normal people happy, so they think that the car is absolutely spot on. But if you actually look at the live data, you'll see that that temperature could be fluctuating anything from 10 to 15 degrees, and the needle not ever moving off of the middle there. So just a little piece of information. If you didn't know that already, you probably did, but anyway, some people didn't. Right, so that's the coolant temperature done. I'm super happy with that. Like I said, there's a lot of other testing that goes on in the background. And if you look at my link playlist, I go through a lot of testing, how to test your inputs, how to test your outputs, etc. So for instance, I've basically plugged the IAT sensor into the coolant temperature there. I've plugged the map sensor in to make sure the voltage changes when I do so. I've got the coolant temperature plugged in there to make sure that that works. I did actually plug in the crank and the cam, and I set the trigger correctly for the VVTi engine, cranked it over, did a log on the ECU, which then showed me the RPM, and I could see it was going to about 200 RPM, which is perfectly fine for cranking over. So I've gone behind the scenes and tested all of that. I've also plugged in an idle air control valve and made sure that the pin goes up and down when you turn on the key, etc. So again, I just don't want to bore you guys. I don't want to do like a 4-hour long video where I have to go through each and every single coil and injector and blah, 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 and show you guys how that's done. But anyway, I'm yabbering on enough. What we need to do now is get this all boxed up, get it off to the customer, and like I said, he needs to get it fitted and in the car and running, which now he should have no problem at all because I've already tested everything on this side. But for everyone else, thanks for watching. If you've got any questions, please let us know below. One thing I will point out is this is a very long time customer of ours. We will not do JZ harnesses like this for everybody. It's just a case of he is a very long time customer that we've worked a lot with, so we've made a special occasion for him. But for everybody else watching, no, we will not do JZ harnesses using the existing harness. All right, that's the general rule. We will not do it. It's all brand new built, and you'll see all of our JZ harness videos. If you go wait to the end of the video, I'll put a link for the playlist for the JZ harnesses so you can see exactly what they look like. But thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Never break, always fight, never quit, do it right, play the game, win it life, have no shame, there's no time, feel the pain,